I was quite a sensitive child growing up, and it really wouldn't take me much to cry. Being excluded, mean comments, losing a game, getting served fish pie for dinner, looking in the mirror at my bowl cuts. It wouldn't take much for me to get the waterworks going. And I remember a number of times being ridiculed at school for how easily I would end up in tears. What are you going to do, cry about it? Yes, actually, quite a lot. An embarrassing amount. I don't know if you remember me, Jenny Bards, crybaby Matt Maslin. But it didn't take long for the social forces around me to suppress my sensitive side. And now I actually aspire to be a person in touch with my emotions, but I often find myself, even in deeply tragic situations, unable to perform the appropriate biological response of crying. In fact, it now seems my biology has been rewired, and the closest I come to crying often ends in my tears somehow being rerouted out my nostrils, which is pretty sexy. This is, of course, to my own detriment. Our tears contain methamphetamine, a chemical that has a narcotic effect on us when we cry through a reaction in our opioid receptors. Turns out that as a kid, I was just getting high on my own supply. So that feeling of release we get when we're crying isn't just sentimental, it's actually healing. And this feeling that we just need to have a good cry isn't a platitude, it's science. And we actually produce 3 different kinds of tears. We have basal tears, the tears which are always present in our eyes and keep them lubricated. Reflex tears, which are produced by external irritants, and ones we're probably familiar with are emotional tears that are triggered by our emotions. And all of these can produce up to around 100 litres of the tears we create in our bodies each year, or in just a couple of days if you have to sit through synod. And even then, the tears that we shed have different tear patterns. In 2008, the photographer Rosalind Fisher, in her book, The Typography of Tears, shows microscopic images of different tear patterns from her own tears. She would place them on a petri dish, let them dry, and then photograph the difference. And this is the result. We have tears from 3 different occurrences of crying: tears of grief, tears of gratitude, and tears of laughter, something I find strangely beautiful. It seems each time we cry, our pain or our joy has its own special signature. Crying is an important part of being human and healing. In our reading today from the Gospel of John, it involves a lot of crying. We find ourselves by the tomb of Jesus' friend Lazarus, and everyone there is weeping. And there's 2 things you should know about crying in Jewish mourning customs. Firstly, Jewish custom was the more unrestrained the weeping, the more honor it paid to the dead. So what was happening at the tomb was probably more akin to a hysterical, undignified shrieking than the soft, suppressed sobbing before club sandwiches and sausage rolls that we're used to at our own funerals. Secondly, and a concept quite bizarre to us, a Jewish funeral custom was to hire professional mourners. And it's recorded in Jewish literature that even the poor were expected to, by minimum, have 2 flute players and 1 wailing woman. Something I will note I expect nothing less of at my own funeral, and I also wanted on the record that I want Tom Warner to be one of the flute players. Regardless, this was quite a racket, but despite the customary elements of the situation, we hear that Jesus was deeply moved. Jesus does not resist what both his biology and his soul were telling him. Jesus wept, and the significance of Jesus crying has not been lost on people. In 2012, Catholics in Mumbai were amazed when a statue of Jesus seemingly began to weep. People started pilgrimaging, that's not a word, but anyway, to it, to get their hands on these holy tears of Jesus that dripped down the body of Jesus and off his feet. People gathered, practically lapping up this water, believing in some divine or magical element to these tears, hoping that they would be blessed. Unfortunately for these believers, a local skeptic did some further investigation and provided practically undeniable evidence that this water was actually coming from a salty sewage system due to capillary action and faulty plumbing. Afterwards, there were lots of tears, but not from Jesus. These were not the bodily tears of Jesus. These were the bodily excretions of man. The tears that are shed in our gospel reading today were not magical, quite the opposite. No, they were tears shed by, or the same tears a compassionate human sheds. And that God would engage in this kind of vulnerable and supposedly weak act was scandalous. One of the defining attributes and virtues of Greek gods was apatheia, or indifference, or impassibility. This is a stark contrast to the God on display in Jesus who weeps over a friend. But it's not just the death of a friend he is deeply moved by, but the impact on his friends and those around him. Jesus hates both death and its consequences. Profoundly, we see Jesus is moved by others being moved. And I wonder if you felt this sometimes at funerals. It's not until the child or the partner of the deceased gets up and begins to weep themselves that it really starts to churn your insides. But Jesus is also personally devastated by the loss of his friend. We hear that when Jesus is invited to come and see Lazarus, he begins to weep. The Jews watching exclaimed, "See how he loved him." And I want to ask an important question at this point. Why is Jesus crying about a problem he is minutes away from fixing? Why does Jesus mourn when he has both the power and the willingness to raise Lazarus from the dead? Jesus cries even though he knows everything will be okay. He weeps even though he knows he has the power to make his friend come to life. He is grief-stricken despite being capable of striking down death. It's quite a bizarre situation. Is he just joining in like the professional mourners present? And I think Jesus finds himself sobbing because this is the appropriate response to the tragedy of death, regardless of what the future holds. Regardless of what future hope we have, grief is the appropriate response to death. Jesus doesn't rush into fixing the problem, but demonstrates his being moved by the tragedy, feeling the full weight and sorrow that death brings, as well as enacting hope and demonstrating the power of life. This is an important point for those who follow Jesus, because it suggests that both hope and sorrow can coexist in the Christian life. Often we can think about grief in a linear way, where we go through a process with different milestones along the way. The 5 Stages of Grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross makes this way of thinking about grief famous when she suggested that we move through 5 different stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And in some ways, this model has been helpful for people identifying their emotions and responses as normal in grief. But unfortunately, I don't think this is really how grief works. We want it to because it would make the whole process a bit more predictable. We could chart where we are along the way. But in my experience, grief is really quite unpredictable. Sometimes it feels like grief ambushes us when we're not expecting it, and we feel its waves come over us at unexpected times and places. Sometimes we are fine when we feel that we shouldn't be, and not fine when we feel we should be. Christchurch-based psychologist Dr. Lucy Honey, who lost her own 12-year-old daughter in a car accident, says this: "Grieving is no linear progression, meaning you start at A and work your way to Z. It's more like an exhausting, frustrating, and ghoulish game of snakes and ladders, back and forth, up and down." And I think this is true. And this can be confusing because in the wake of loss, we can bounce between having fun and being paralyzed by sadness, between laughing and crying, between enjoying our work and being completely unmotivated, between being hopeful and being despairing. Psychologists call this the dual process of grief, where we both live lives and oscillate between loss-orientated lives and restoration-orientated experiences of life. In our passage today, we see Jesus embrace both this experience of loss and grief, but also this act of hope and restoration. And so what do we do in this time of unpredictability and grieving? And how do we support those we love who are grieving? Let's now think about Job and his friends. Job could perhaps be touted as the most grief-stricken human in all of literature, a man who lost everything and to no fault of his own. And you notice in the reading, his friends approach him and don't even recognize him in the distance. That's how grief-stricken he is. And Job's friends are often characterized as, for lack of a better word, dicks. And don't get me wrong, they were very clearly entirely unhelpful, as this William Blake engraving illustrates quite well. And I've actually made my own wee edit to illustrate this further as well. This is where your hard-earned tithes are going, by the way. But I don't think they started out this way. We hear in our reading today that when they heard of Job's pain, they sympathized and went to care for him. And when they found him, they cried and they sat with him in silence because they saw his suffering was great for 7 whole days and nights. And I think this is quite remarkable, to simply be with and wait with someone in their pain, to enter into it. And sometimes this is the best and even only thing to do. At the end of last year, one of my best mates was in town, and he's from up north and usually tells me when he's here, but we busted him on Google Maps location sharing. And so I messaged him asking why he was down, and he had mentioned that his parents were having some health issues. And so he comes over and he tells me what these health issues were. Within just a few weeks, he had found out that his dad had incurable esophageal cancer and his mum had bowel cancer. What do you say to that? How do you fix that? You can't. So we cracked open some beers and we hung out. And now when he's down to support his parents, he comes over and we play Mario Party on Nintendo Switch and we drink whiskey and we chat about how he's doing and how his parents are doing, and we chat absolute garbage as well. And I don't think I'm doing this perfectly at all, but I think what he needs from me as a friend is just to be there. And this is the same way that God's primary posture to us in this world is to simply be with us. This is God's primary motivation in this world, to be with us. I think we are called to be with others. And I think this is how Job's friends started as well, by just being there, entering into Job's life and his suffering and getting in the trenches with him. So where did things go wrong? Where did the wheels fall off? The wheels fell off when they tried to explain what is inexplainable and to fix what is unfixable. And we can often do this to our brothers and sisters too. We can minimalize grief and say the dangerous words of at least this or at least that. At least it was quick. At least they were old. At least they lived a good life. At least. We can explain the grief away. Everything happens for a reason. You just need to pray more. Maybe this is a test of your faith. God needed another angel. This is just a consequence of sin. We can guilt. They wouldn't want you to say that. They wouldn't want you to feel this way. We can diagnose. I read a book and it says you should be doing this. You need to eat more. It sounds like you're in the anger stage of grief and it seems to be getting worse the more I talk. What if we, like Jesus, in the face of grief, felt what needed to be felt and helped others to do the same? What if we need to learn how to wait well in grief, both in our own grief and the grief of others? Earlier in the week, Kerry mentioned a prayer to me written by Andy Rain, and I think it's really helpful for us in this moment today. He says this: Do not hurry as you walk with grief. It does not help the journey. Walk slowly, pausing often. Do not hurry as you walk with grief. Do not be disturbed by memories that come unbidden. Swiftly forgive and let Christ speak for you unspoken words. Unfinished conversation will be resolved in him. Do not be disturbed. Be gentle with the one who walks in grief. If it is you, be gentle with yourself. Swiftly forgive. Walk slowly, pausing often. Take time. Be gentle as you walk with grief. This is a photo taken by Roman Philippi during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I leave us with this because I think it shows this strange coexistence we live with between sorrow and hope, life and death, destruction and restoration, sunflowers and rockets. May you go this morning feeling free to both weep and to hope. May you go unrushed to grieve and walking slowly through what must be faced. And may you go waiting well in grief, in the presence of your friends and of your loving God. Amen.